I've played tons of games over a wide berth of systems and more importantly, genres. And one genre that I tend to avoid are RPGs and JRPGs as well. In fact, a vast majority of the time, the only reason that I play them is because my viewership on Twitch specifically requests it. For a long time, I would play about 20 games before tackling my next RPG because I knew that it would be such a time sink. And if I wasn't streaming and making videos daily, that wouldn't be an issue. But I do, so there's a lot of up and down with the controller. Now this particular video was a firefighter video giveaway, and our good friend Jeff Daigle5487 requested my favorite RPG titles, but again, I haven't played that many, so I'm gonna do like I did for the point and click episode and the JRPG episode. This will be a living series, meaning in a year's time, I'll come back and update them. But as far as right now, July of 2024, these are my top 10 RPGs I've played to date. Now before I begin, I do want to say, I haven't played that many traditional RPGs, so I'm going to loop in some ones with RPG elements. Hopefully that doesn't make you too mad. Quest for Glory was a franchise I avoided for a while in Sierra's library because I wasn't sure that I'd enjoy it. For the longest time, I strictly focused on Sierra's point-and-click titles because that was my childhood, at least in PC gaming. That was my PC gaming origin story, specifically Torrens Passage. But a few years ago, I decided to finally break down and check it out because it's a long-standing franchise, at least during the golden era of Sierra. This game went by two naming conventions. The first release of it was Hero's Quest, So You Want to Be a Hero, and the second was Quest for Glory, So You Want to Be a Hero. And while many don't consider the first entry to be an RPG, I do, adventure RPG at least. We focus on building stats that aren't inherently visible, and we have a sense of realism that offers replayability. You can approach this game with 3 different classes, the Fighter, Magic User, or Thief, and all of those classes have different ways in how the game pans out to complete your objectives. For example, should we need an item that's up in a tree, a Fighter could just be so direct that he climbs the tree. But we need to practice climbing, it builds our strength. Whereas a magic user would use a spell to get that object, but we need to be proficient in that spell. There's just so many different approaches, and that's awesome to me. I need to continue this one at some point. Diablo was my first Blizzard game I ever dipped my toes into. For a long time, I wanted to check them out because people swore by them, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't like it at first, but after beating it, I was impressed. Now the version I played was the GOG release, which included Hellfire as an expansion, but I only focused on the vanilla game. There are 3 playable classes, the Warrior, Rogue, and Sorcerer, and I elected for the Warrior as I'm not overly fond of magic users. One of the cool things about Diablo was that the dungeons were procedurally generated, but one of the lesser cool things is that if you play it, you'll likely not beat it the first time. That's just how it goes. I think you're expected to clear it down to a certain level, then restart the game and do it all over again with the experience that you've gained. It's not bad to me. Now the whole premise of Diablo is that good and evil are always at odds with each other, and the evil, it's a demonic evil, one that manifests as the legions of Diablo, the big bad evil guy of the game. We just go down endless floors, killing enemies. It's kind of therapeutic. Diablo II is a slightly different game, at least in how it flowed. Where the first game was floor upon floor of procedurally generated dungeons, Diablo II featured more of an overworld with dungeon instances, which I preferred because they were towns I could check out and buy equipment from. There are 4 acts, each of which have their own city, the Rogue Encampment, Loot Ghislaine, Kurast, and finally Hell, but I did play the Lord of Destruction expansion as well, which offers an extra act and an extra area, Mount Ariat. There's also more difficulty levels and a hardcore mode if you're feeling extra spicy. Diablo II also introduced the Horadric Cube, courtesy of Deckard Cain, and 5 vanilla classes, the Amazon, Necromancer, Barbarian, Sorceress, and Paladin. I believe I played a Paladin. If you play the Lords of Destruction expansion, you'll have access to the Druid and the Assassin, and as a direct sequel, this one was so fun to me. Seeing characters we knew and loved return again, that's continuation, and continuation fucking turns me on. Diablo 2 was a cult classic if there ever was one, and I had the luxury of playing it with my friends, so it was an even better time. Honorable mention of Diablo II Resurrected. This one was kind of unexpected because at the time we knew Diablo IV was coming and that Diablo Immortal was being shit out for the phone markets. In my life, I have yet to play an RPG, beat it, and then say, fuck it, let's do it again. I did with Diablo II Resurrected because I was so interested to see how Blizzard approached quality of life improvements, and I was surprised to see that there really weren't any. It's just a remaster. It's funny to swap between the graphical standards of 2000 and 2021. I didn't realize how shit the original Diablo 2 looked, but hey, I still made it through, and I still enjoyed it. So if you want a proper facelift for a legacy game, check out Diablo II Resurrected. While Dungeons & Dragons had tons of games throughout the years, some of which were good and some of which that were bad, Pathfinder came out the gate swinging and they hit a home run every single time. The one I played was Kingmaker, and there is a sequel called Wrath of the Righteous, but I haven't had the time to play it yet. Now, Pathfinder itself is based on a revised formula for Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, so I was naturally drawn to it courtesy of my good friend Caleb, who's been running games with me and his friends for going on a few years now. It's basically part of my life. Every single Saturday, I play Pathfinder. As with Dungeons & Dragons, there are individual settings, and in the case of Pathfinder Kingmaker, it's the Kingmaker setting, which adds slightly different rule sets than a traditional dungeon explorer. For starters, at one point, we'll be establishing a kingdom, and we'll need to assign specific NPCs and choose which missions they get employed on carefully. At any point during this game, we can lose, meaning that if you put in 80 hours, you could still lose because of a critical failure of the kingdom. Outside of that, it is a traditional RPG in the vein of, say, Baldur's Gate, where we control tons of characters. And because of that, you do need a somewhat encyclopedic knowledge of the rules and character building, which at the time, I didn't really have. Which is why I gave my cleric a class point of Bard, much to Caleb's disappointment. All in all, Owlcat Games did a damn good job with this one. It's worth checking out. This is probably going to be a hot take. Mass Effect was one of the first RPGs I ever took the time to play, and as a trilogy, Mass Effect 3 left a bad taste in tons of people's mouths. But that's the beauty of our individual experiences. We can sit down, enjoy or hate a game, and count on others for enjoying or hating a game as well. And while I did scratch my head at the creative choices of the ending, I still enjoyed the game. There are 3 modes from the get-go: action, story, and RPG, all of which affect combat and story progression, but the beauty of these games is that you can make manual choices and deal with the consequences, and that's something I always treasure. So logically, I played the RPG mode. There's also more gimmicks in the game. In the previous 2, we didn't need to contend with too much outside of the suicide mission, but in 3, we have to increase our effective military strength by doing quests, and by improving relationships with core NPCs we encounter throughout the game. Story-wise, we're still playing as Commander Shepard and going up against the Reapers, while contending with the bullshit that Cerberus pulled in Mass Effect 2. The characters are dope, the weapons are still awesome, and even if you don't like this game, I do. And I think it's a great science fiction action RPG. The original Wasteland served as an inspiration for what would eventually become Fallout, so naturally, when I was approaching the rules of release for the Fallout franchise, I wanted to check out where this all started, think of it as a spiritual predecessor. And I was beyond fucking disappointed. The entire game was a labor of love in how it's presented, and you can tell it's a very rudimentary and boring game, period. However, my lead moderator Nick bought me Wasteland Remastered, and let me tell you, there's not many times where I retire a game and then immediately fall back in love with it. I tend to protect my mental health by pushing away shitty games, and I don't yank them back in like I caught the biggest bass in the lake. I did for Wasteland Remastered. From the bottom to the top, this is the same game with an unfathomable amount of quality of life improvements. The music, the visuals, the way we play it, it's a perfect RPG. The plot remains the same. Basically, at some point in 1998, there was a nuclear war, and what remained of the United States Army rebranded as the Desert Rangers, and they basically run a peacekeeping operation in Southwest America. That's the principle. Our whole objective is to go up against a rogue AI and prevent that AI from taking over the region by blowing up its reactor. It's worth checking out, trust me. Diablo 3 was my first adventure in playing a Diablo game. I know that I mentioned earlier, I meant like the franchise, it was the first time. Diablo 3 is a fun game. I was actually stationed in Korea when it came out, or at least when it was free. I don't remember when Diablo 3 came out exactly, but at the time, Diablo 3 and Hearthstone were the products Blizzard was pushing. And if something is free, why not check it out, right? More drinking money for me. But Diablo 3 looked great, like I hadn't seen a game like it, ever. So I played it, and immediately lost interest because I felt like I was doing the same thing over and over and over again. Now as an adult, after playing the other Diablos, I absolutely loved this one. We could play as a barbarian, demon hunter, monk, witch doctor, wizard, or crusader. I personally played a demon hunter because I love the whole walking around and shooting the fuck out of things aspect. The game itself takes place 20 years after the events of Diablo II and revolves around our character of choice, the Nephilim, going to investigate a fallen star. It has 4 acts with an optional 5th act if you bought the Reaper of Souls expansion. And because I've historically enjoyed the Diablo franchise, I recently beat Diablo IV with a bunch of my friends. I was upset when Blizzard announced a phone game, and to this day I haven't played it because I'm not big on paying for a game after I've bought it, right? Microtransactions are a cancer on the gaming industry, so I waited patiently for Diablo IV, and many others did as well. This was the highest selling Blizzard game to date, selling $666 million in revenue within the first 5 days of launch, according to the New York Times, if you believe it. It plays exactly like the other mainline Diablo games where it's just non-stop loot porn. We have expanded skill trees that allow for great customization, beautiful weaponry and art, and the whole game is just an incredibly fun time. Like I said, I played it with my friends, and I take pride in experiencing that with them. In the game, we can play as a barbarian, a sorcerer, druid, rogue, or necromancer, and I chose druid, because why the fuck wouldn't you want to turn into a bear? I will say that despite the fact that I loved this game, I didn't really enjoy the seasonal stuff that came after. It just didn't feel right. Or maybe I'm just bad at the game. I died way more in seasonal than I did the baseline game, and to me, that's frustrating. I don't want to get too deep into the plot where it's still a somewhat fresh game, but it takes place 50 years after Diablo III and has an absolute demon mommy at the helm, Lilith. Early in my Air Force career, when I was in tech school, I didn't have the video game library with me that I have now. I had my PS3, an HP laptop with a CD drive. I had nothing but Steam, UFC, and a bunch of shitty games. One day, I went to the GameStop on Shepherd Air Force Base and saw Mass Effect for sale. I had always heard about it, the ability to make choices that would define your gameplay experience, and I was like, screw it, why not? That moment is a core memory for me because I booted up a game that would take me to worlds that I could only dream of visiting. The storytelling of Mass Effect is exemplary, and it reminded me so much of a game that I pirated so long ago, Knights of the Old Republic. Kinda makes sense, they're both BioWare. The whole story revolves around Commander Shepard and his encounters with the Geth that lead him to being selected as a Spectre, and as the game goes by, we learn about the Reapers and the big bad guy, Sovereign. We can control how our party is outfitted, we can buy better weapons, we can fine-tune Shepard to be who we want him to be, and our decisions can be carried forward to other games. Which again, continuity makes me rock hard! Going back and playing this on the Legendary Edition trilogy, I was pleased to be able to enjoy this game again. It just felt as great as it did when I was younger. And here we are with my favorite RPG that I've played to date. Again, I haven't played that many. My JRPG experience is significantly more than my traditional RPG experience, and Mass Effect to me was one of the best games that I've ever played. Sure, it has a major gimmick with the suicide mission, but if you invest your time and effort into preparing yourself for that and give a damn about your friends, you'll be solid. Mass Effect 2 to me upgraded everything that I loved about Mass Effect and in some ways changed the focus of others. For example, in 2, BioWare seemed to care more about the third-person shooter part of the game. They limited ammunition and brought back the Call of Duty renewable health mechanic. And again, those side missions, stupid important in comparison to the traditional one. It's just a solid game, and from the first few seconds of it I was captivated. I don't want to spoil it, but it involves collectors this time around. The characters, the music, the ambiance, the worlds, the storytelling, everything was perfect. And then, well, Mass Effect 3 happened, but I didn't mind it. From the beginning, Mass Effect was meant to be a trilogy, and sometimes trilogies don't end with happy endings. And I accepted that. And that's it for today. I know that it was simple, but again, I just don't have the experience to have some epic-ass list about the best RPGs I've played, and I hope in the future, in a few years' time, I'll revisit this episode and maybe we'll see some changes. I hope I do. I want to be impressed by the games out there, and I want to expand that mental library. What RPGs do you suggest? Feel free to comment down below. Also, if you made it to the end of this video, you're home in our community. We're a group of folks who enjoy remembering a time when life was a little bit easier to live. We'd love to have you here. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the products that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.